I'd say first preference for luxury is probably the most critical one. It's an emotive decision, it's not a rational decision. We're predictably irrational beings. We're more ape than anything else. I think Kahneman won the Nobel Prize for proving that about 95% of all decisions are made emotionally. Most people buy their first preference, especially things like cars. They do research, but then the decision's almost too big. The same when you take a new job or you buy a new house. You do a lot of research, but in the end, it's your gut feel that you have. It's your emotional response. And something like 85% of people that buy a new car end up buying the car that was their first preference years before they decided they needed a new car. So the critical bit for luxury is making sure you're that first preference.
Gavin, and welcome to the show.
Hi, Mills. Is Mills okay?
Yes, yeah. Totally allowed. Okay, so we're really happy to have you here on the show, and we'd love to hear about your journey and how you've landed in Luxury Automotive.
Well, most recently, I was in Singapore and I wanted to move back to Australia, and that job was available, and it was one that I was really keen to move into. So that's how I moved into automotive. How I moved into luxury, I've always tried to do careers that follow my passion. So when I used to work for The Guardian because I was a big believer in what they stood for. When I moved to Australia and worked at Universal Music, because music was a massive passion, and alcohol and food and wine is a big passion. The opportunity to work for Moët Hennessy, that was more the pull, to be honest, than luxury. But since being in luxury, I do really enjoy it. It's an amazing category.
Completely agree. Let's get into the metrics that matter. We'll get into the questions. The latest Bain & Company luxury report shows that cars remain the largest segment in the global luxury market, a category, I guess, with enormous value and high stakes. So when you're responsible for proving that marketing actually drives performance, I imagine it's just as much high stakes. What are the core metrics you rely on to evaluate marketing effectiveness? And for context, how do those metrics actually work, and why do they matter?
How those metrics actually... So I think, first of all, try and always take an evidence-based approach. I think that is what sums up marketing effectiveness. And in terms of what metrics matter, I think you have to start with the core company matters. Metrics. Too many marketers just focus on marketing metrics, and then they wonder why the board and the executive team don't take them seriously. It's really important to understand the core, business metrics first of all, and then what marketing metrics, how they have an impact on them. So, for example, brand health is really important. Brand health is proven by multiple studies to directly correlate with market share growth, with revenue growth, with increased profitability. So a key metric might be something like consideration, first preference, whatever it might be. Every business is different, but they're your metrics. They're probably the most important big annual ones that you work towards. And then you've got smaller proxies that you can look at to help you get there. So that could be things like share of search. Share of search is proven. Increases in share of search typically correlate to increases in market share down the track. Not always. Sometimes an increase in in share of search might actually be because something bad's happened. So people are searching for the wrong reasons, but more often than not, it's a positive. And then I think probably the main one that we use is econometric modelling. But you don't really get a quarterly dashboard or anything like that. You do a cut once a year. Use that information to tell what is and isn't working more broadly than just marketing, and make more informed decisions off the back of it.
And for people working at home in other luxury categories, do you think the same metrics apply?
Pretty much. I mean, you adapt. Sometimes you want to go for awareness. The objective is building more awareness. Sometimes you've got to build more consideration. Sometimes it's more first preference. I'd say first preference for luxury is probably the most critical one, because it's an emotive decision. It's not a rational decision. We're predictably irrational beings. We're more ape than anything else. I think Kahneman won the Nobel Prize for proving that about 95% of all decisions are made emotionally using System 1. And other research shows that when most people buy their first preference, especially things like cars. They do research, but then the decision's almost too big. The same when you take a new job or you buy a new house. You do a lot of research, but in the end, it's your gut feel that you have. It's your emotional response. And something like 85% of people that buy a new car end up buying the car that was their first preference years before they decided they needed a new car. So the critical bit for luxury is making sure you're that first preference.
So let's move on to creative. The question on everybody's lips when we're talking about data-driven marketing is, how do you not kill the creative process? There's always been a tension for marketing. Measure too much and you're killing creativity. Don't measure enough and you're flying blind, I guess. So my question for you is, how do you evaluate whether creative is working? And has the data ever surprised you in a creative decision?
Creativity is at the core of it. Someone has to come up with a creative idea that's original and different and human and, really connects emotionally, because emotional content is what drives growth. But it doesn't mean that you can't do testing. I think there is a bit of pushback, and I understand why. I think some of the creative testing solutions out there, I frankly don't trust at all and don't look at the results. They don't ring true. In the past, I've done additional creative testing with System 1, which kind of does ring true for me and is the only one which I think is validated by the IPA. So yeah, we'll typically just do that creative testing, more to try and understand, is there any opportunity to improve the creative? And also, where should we place it? For example, we've done some testing before where you saw the out of home. The TV might resonate really strongly, but the out of home of the same campaign doesn't necessarily. Or if you're just doing a campaign that's out of home and print only, if you do mass testing, so against the general sort of population, it might show you that it doesn't resonate with the general population. But then when you test it against, say, the luxury consumer, it could perform a lot better. And we've seen that actually quite recently. So a creative that wasn't performing very well that we were planning to run in out of home, that we got very selective about where we placed it because it resonated with more affluent audiences and it didn't resonate with more mass audiences. But yeah, I think that optimizing of creative, there was one example with, I think, Clico Hotel, where it was a beautiful piece of content, but the start of it started with Hotel Clico. And what we saw in the creative testing was that the vast majority of people, they really liked it, but they didn't know what brand it was for. So had a bit of a hypothesis that it's perhaps because we worked in alcohol, but not everyone knows Clico. People know Verve Clico. They don't all know Clico. So Hotel Clico was too obscure a reference. So at the beginning of the creative, we started with the Verve Clico label and logo to frame it straight away. Then you showed the Hotel Clico slightly afterwards, and all of a sudden, I think the amount of people that recognised what brand it was, like, more than doubled. And that went on to be one of the most successful creatives that we ever did. And I think in the brand lift studies that we did with Meta, it was some of the highest results that Meta said they'd ever seen, and conclusive as well, like something like 8 times over the APAC average at the time. So yeah, you're quite often surprised by the creative testing and the results that you get, but you can usually figure out why it's happened.
So it's a myth that luxury shouldn't test creative?
Absolutely, I think so. I think why would you not do pilots? It's like, you don't have to necessarily follow the advice. I quite like the analogy of insights almost being like a street light. It should be there for illumination, not for support. So a drunk person might be stood there holding onto it for support and using it to, justify why they do what they do. It should really be to illuminate rather than for support. So if you use it in the right way, then it can just give you more information to make a more informed decision. You can still go with your gut, but actually it tells you whether or not people are resonating with the content or not.
So data and intuition together as opposed to one or the other?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You have to trust your gut. Sometimes your gut goes against what the data says because, in general, with research, what was it, Henry Ford's quote around, if people asked me what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. So you can't always...
I love that one. That's a classic one, that quote, yeah.
Yeah, and to be fair, it's one which I think luxury, they embrace that quite a lot and they push back against evidence. They push back against research because they want to trust their instinct only, which is, I understand that you have to have it, especially for the actual artists that's creating the luxury items themselves, the designers. But I think for marketers, it's a bit over the top. I think
I completely agree with you, and I think the quoting about luxury being, so heavily reliant on instinct. I think those instincts, especially from executives in luxury, are also from years of observation, which is a form of insight and evidence-based, right? So even the intuition, I think, in luxury is coming from some form of evidence.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at most of the people that founded those businesses, like Louis Vuitton, the man himself, and all of those people that founded it, they were there. They were on the front end. They were, making bags. They were making leather goods. They were speaking to their consumers about what they wanted and what they didn't want. And that side of the business, it can't just go to a focus group and listen, but they should be speaking to consumers to understand what consumers want, to identify future trends of things that people don't know that they want yet.
Yeah.
But for marketers, it's different. You've run a campaign. Does the campaign resonate or not? And is it working in the market? Why wouldn't you want more data to tell you whether or not it is or it isn't?
Okay, so let's talk about the purchase journey. So you mentioned it there with the ateliers and talking to the customer at that point of purchase. What about luxury automotive? So this is clearly a very high consideration category, and you referenced it a little bit earlier. People could take years to make a decision. I mean, sometimes the stakes are up to 300,000 euros, I guess, in terms of what's on the table. So I'm guessing that they're researching websites, reviews, dealerships, which can get quite complex for you when you're trying to measure which part of your marketing was effective. So how do you think about attribution when the purchase journey is so long and so multi-touch, and what kind of data or signals along that path do you pay most attention to?
Yeah, it's a good question. So attribution itself, we don't use digital attribution, a more traditional use of attribution at all, because that tends to just focus on whatever the last click was. So no surprise, Google Analytics and the Google platform, usually some of their products are the last things that people will interact with, so they steal credit for a lot of stuff that they actually had nothing to do with. And you can see that when you do MMMs and econometric modelling, that things like branded search, there's no incrementality. They might have gone through Google, but it doesn't mean the pavement outside the front of a luxury boutique is responsible for the sales any more than it's responsible for the sales. Those purchase journeys, you're right, they are very long. And a lot of people have already, they don't even do any research. Something like a quarter, no more than that, I think it's 36% of buyers, luxury auto buyers, don't even consider any other brand. They already know what brand, they just go and they get it, and they don't even look at a single other. Only, I think, a further 84% or 87%, something like that look at two other brands. So they've got a small consideration set, and then 85% of them buy whatever their first preference was.
And can I ask a cheeky question? What data told you that?
There's multiple different data sources. There's we have a thing called New Car Buyer Survey, which is a wealth of information. And then there's other research that's been done around decision making and first preference and stuff like that helps inform some of it as well. But yeah, there's a lot of information out there if you choose to look at it around, I think something like only 60% of people visit the manufacturer's website. So there's a lot of people that don't look at reviews, a lot that do, but there's a lot that don't. You have to understand the consumer, you have to understand their motivations, what drives their purchases, by looking at as much data as you can from all of those different sources. Average purchase window in Australia for a new car is about 8 years. People in UK and US, it's more like 4 years. People change them more frequently. I suspect that's because our number plates don't show you how old the car is, and in the UK and the US they do. So people feel a need to move. Plus they have more finance. Yeah, they have more finance penetration, so people just finance everything, whereas people pay more cash here.
So is that true? Australians pay more cash?
Yeah, the majority of cars are paid for by cash. I mean, there might be some financing in the background, but yeah, it's cash formally. So yeah, I think you really just have to understand the consumer and really what drives them to purchase. And along the way, you can look at things like share of search as a proxy. You can look at your brand health, your quarterly brand health, your worth paying more for, your first preference. That's the really critical information, because if more people think you're worth paying more for, more people are moving you to first preference, then more people will be purchasing you.
Okay, so you might have answered this next question. For marketers on similar long journeys, is there one indicator that's especially useful to track? And if I've understood you correctly, no. You just need to get really close to the consumer, get close to the data. Over time, you'll begin to understand, where they're coming from or what the key purchase drivers are.
Yeah, I wish it was as easy as one single metric.
Yes, I know, one magic bullet.
Yeah, no, there's it's like an orchestra where there's a symphony. It's not one single instrument, it's not one single performer, it's all of them together that you've got to look at to get to understand the whole picture. And a lot like marketing effectiveness, actually, the more channels you have, the more effective it is, and they all work together. Any one on their own is nowhere near as powerful. So yeah, I think you have to look at all of them. If there's a key metric, I'd say probably things like worth paying more for and first preference. Seeing them move in the right direction would probably be the most critical.
Amazing. Okay, so it's a really good segue into my next question, which is going to be about long-term brand building versus short-term performance. I guess it's more so in luxury, but it's really across all marketing. It's a real classic tension in terms of the short-term pressure to keep the CFO happy versus the long-term brand building, which we all know is absolutely necessary. We all know the 60-40 rule from Binet and Field, but in a high-value category like automotive, I suspect that balance gets even harder to manage. So I've got a really tricky question for you. How do you decide how much budget goes into long-term brand building versus short-term performance activity when you've got the CFO on your back? And if you can tell me in your answer, when do you trust data versus instinct in making those calls?
I mean, I started off in performance marketing, so I understand performance marketing and know how important it is. But I think too many companies invest too much money on the short term and not enough on the long term, especially when it's a more considered purchase, like a car. When I first started, I thought we were over-investing. So I made the case and, to say, could we break some of the rules that were in place that said how much you should spend where, and lobbied to basically spend more money on long-term brand building, and which pretty much doubled the amount of money we were able to spend to do that. Without getting into any specifics, we started to follow Binet and Field 60-40 almost as a starting point, but adjusted. And I think when you realise that the vast majority of consumers, their consideration sets are shrinking. Most of them buy whatever their first preference is anyway. And you've really got to try and reach them earlier, because also actually, another stat is that at any one time, out of the entire car buying market, only 1% are in the category at the moment. So only 1% are ever buying, 3% buy each year. Used cars are twice as big as new cars. So, and people do move across. Some buy new, some buy second hand, and then they'll shift. In general, people shift. If you're a luxury SUV buyer, there's a good chance next time you won't be a luxury SUV buyer. You'll be something different. And so there's a good number of people that move. So I think for us, it was really understanding that if you spend too much money trying to convince the 1% and oversaturating the 1% of active buyers with too much short-term performance marketing, too much sales activation, you're ignoring the 99% who actually are the ones that are gonna, you've got to get them beforehand to make sure they've, you're front of mind, you're their first preference, that they think you're worth paying more for. It's almost too late once you've got once they've gone in category.
Fascinating. And do you think it's more specific to the larger ticket items because it is such a high-priced luxury item that you need to do more brand building and the decisions are coming much earlier?
I think it's more specific to luxury and a more considered, more expensive luxury purchase, more so, yes. However, I think it's true across all luxury. If you look, that same research that showed, like, if you're FMCG, if you're you're doing a chocolate bar or a can of soda or something like that, people can shift. They don't always stick to their first preference. Within luxury and more considered purchases, people typically stick to their first preference. It's a more difficult decision to make. A truly rational purchase. In fact, actually, Les Binet talks about this, who worked on the 60-40. When he tries to explain, what is a more emotive purchase, what's a rational purchase, he uses the example that a truly rational purchase would be something like a corkscrew. There's no brand in mind. You just want a corkscrew. So you'll look at the reviews online and you're like, okay, $40, or I'm going to spend $80 on that one that looks like the sommeliers have in the restaurant and it's got a nice wood handle, looks really sturdy. Okay, I'll do it's a purely rational purchase. For almost everything else, it's an emotive purchase. You're in a supermarket, there's 40,000 products. You just go through on autopilot. You don't even think about what you're picking up. You can't think rationally about what you pick up. And the same with like luxury purchases. It's not that one's rationally better than the other. It's that what's got the most status, what do I believe in, what's got the best story, which one do I resonate, what does this say about me? So it's all of those things that are all wrapped in emotion rather than rational thought.
And on emotion, obviously we talk a lot in luxury that, you know, the purchase is very emotional. Is there anything specific for luxury cars that you've noticed in the data or that, you know, it seems to be a regular trigger? What is it sort of tapping into? Which psychology?
I think most luxury buyers, so there's 5 main buyer archetypes almost within automotive. I think there's pragmatists, that a car's just, it gets me from A to B. Those guys aren't buying luxury cars typically. There's the discriminators that want everything. There's the value seekers that are just looking for a bargain. There's brand believers, and those brand believers will typically, they've just got a specific brand. That again, not hugely luxury. It's more like a brand like Toyota, where people just love Toyotas and they always want to get a Toyota. So they skew heavily with brand believers. And then there's desire driven. And desire driven typically is where a lot of our consumers will be, where the car is a statement about them. It's not just an A to B. It's, you know, it's a lifestyle choice. It's something which, you know, they aspire to, and it's a car that makes them feel good. It makes them feel exceptional. It drives incredibly well, and something they can be proud of.
And is that something you're thinking about when you are building your marketing and your creative? You're thinking clearly about that segment, and is it across the entire team? Does everybody live and breathe the consumer segment?
I wouldn't say everyone lives and breathes it all the time. We do some creative. A lot of the time we use global creative, so we'll more defer to the stuff you talked about before, the system 1 testing, to understand what does and doesn't resonate. But when we do create content locally, absolutely, it has to be talking to that desire-driven consumer.
Yes, we talk about desire a lot on this show. Okay, so from what works really well, I'm going to flip the script now and talk about some of the mistakes we see, because essentially we all learn the hard way from mistakes, and I think they're really important to pull out. You've worked across the luxury industry for a few years and across different businesses, across different teams. What are some of the biggest mistakes you see marketers make? And on the flip side, how should it be done, in your opinion?
They just want to trust their intuition entirely, and they don't want to listen to evidence. So push back against the consumer insights, push back against the testing. So I think that doesn't work. You've got to have both. You need to have your intuition, you need to have your gut feel, but you also need to then test, is it working or isn't it working? But I think one of the big ones, and this almost a perception within luxury marketers, that you have to do these brand activations. And don't get me wrong, brand activations are incredibly important, but they've got to be done well. I've seen so many that where there's a fancy video and it's shared and the boardrooms all applaud it, and you're like, hold on, there's 2 million spent on that. There was maybe 200 people went. You can never get, and there was no media off the back of it. There was nowhere in media. There was no content creation. It was just an experience. How can you ever get a return on investment for that? When you do the maths, you just can't. So I've actually started to create something called an impact calculator that's almost a little business case. What increase do you think you'll get in purchase off the back of the people that attend? What margin do you make on that? Does that start to pay for it based on the number of people that actually experience? Then you move to how many people will see it. So if you're doing something, a common one in our last company was, you know, almost pop-up bars in shopping centres that were celebrated as brilliant. The revenue was always really low. The exposure in terms of the footfall that would walk past it was typically quite low. There was no return on investment. So I've seen lots and lots of examples of that. So I think the one thing that luxury gets wrong is absolutely do activations. I'm a massive believer in them. We invest a good sort of 20 to 30% of our budget in doing them. but we make sure that we're going to get either enough PR value or enough people seeing it, enough people talking about it, or enough people experiencing it for it to deliver a return on investment.
And I remember when I worked with you, it was one of your bugbears when you saw an incredible activation, and there was obviously digital being your kind of your core passion as well. I remember us often having conversations about, I cannot believe they didn't amplify this. I cannot believe they didn't amplify this. You know, I think your point as well about the marketers walking in, doing the big video, impressing the boardroom, another topic we used to talk about a lot, and it's actually been coined now as I think they're calling it the PowerPoint phenomenon or something like that. It's coming to the forefront of, okay, marketers, you need to start putting some numbers and some rigor behind what you're presenting. Presenting a beautiful PowerPoint isn't enough. And I think they're connecting the conversation sort of globally more around the consumer experience, sort of trying to say, well, if your PowerPoint's beautiful, it doesn't necessarily mean that the consumer experience is beautiful. You've got to get out there and, as you say, sort of get closer to the consumers. So I think it's coming to light. I think as the world accelerates with digital and AI, and it's much easier to, I guess, our lives are tracked and monitored so much that, it's getting to the point where as a marketer, you cannot ignore this anymore.
Yeah, I think there's a bit of a trade-off there. A lot of people get promoted off the back of, a cool activation and a great video that gets shared across the company or gets shared on LinkedIn. So you've kind of got to do that part as well. And also what's not helped is that the earned media values that get pushed around, they're pie in the sky. The so-called earned media value that the platforms actually that probably we all use generate. Like there was a good example of it, a publication that I won't name, but actually the earned media value and the reach was apparently 500,000. And then when you look at it, that's the entire reach across the entire platform. Ours was just one single digital article that was on there. It's only digital, it wasn't print at the time. So the actual reach was more like 3,000-4,000. The editor showed me the data and I could see that the actual impressions that it had received was like 3,000 or 4,000. But the platform was claiming it had 500,000 reach and it was worth, tens of thousands of dollars. It simply isn't true. So I think you just need to be a little bit skeptical of that and try and use the earned media value, but also try and calculate the actual media value. And if you can, try and find a PR reporting tool that is actually credible, which is quite hard to do.
It is. And actually for emerging marketers at home who are probably managing the media agency, do you have like one tip on how they can apply this?
Have a detailed breakdown. So actually some of the campaigns that, on the surface look really successful, when you actually dug into the PR reports, it might be that something was mentioned on a breakfast show for fleetingly and it's assigned a value of $500,000 to it. So just look at that and question, is that true? So actually go through, almost do an audit of the PR report and actually think, what would you pay? If you had to pay for it, what would you actually pay? And you'll see that probably what you would be willing to pay for, and you do pay more for earned, 100%. Earned is more valuable than an actual ad. And you probably should pay 3 times more for the same amount of exposure. But when you actually go through and do that exercise and you say, what would I actually pay for what we received there? It's normally about 10% of what the formal earned media value says. I think doing that exercise is probably worthwhile.
Okay, so we are ready to wrap up and close. I've got a few mentor style questions for you for our emerging marketers at home. The first one is about today's topic. So if they want to build their effectiveness muscle, where do you recommend they start?
Something like only 25% of marketers have formal qualifications in marketing.
I don't know what you're going to recommend.
So, yeah, I think there's some great courses. There's Ritson's Mini MBA. There's Walk, Master of Advertising Effectiveness. Really good for trying to understand that area. If you don't have the budget to do that, I think you should absolutely do that. But if you just want to get started, go to ChatGPT, ask, what would these professors, what would Byron Sharp say? Summarize Byron Sharp's key theories, read the books, How Brands Grow, follow certain people on LinkedIn, look at some of the studies that have been done by the IPA, and just use ChatGPT to really sort of hammer in and understand the effectiveness. I mean, there's so many great people out there that you can lean on. Rory Sutherland, behavioural economics, what would he do? How would he apply certain things? So I'd use that as a starting point.
For those looking to break into the luxury world, we know it's often difficult to get into, especially the large heritage maisons. What would be your advice on how to break into the luxury industry?
I started off in other categories, and I worked in cosmetics, and that was kind of semi-luxury. It was masstige. So yeah, I didn't intentionally look to get into luxury. I think you should learn everything as much as you can about understanding luxury, because you can apply it in other areas.
I think luxury today is recruiting a lot of people from outside. So your advice about start elsewhere and then come in is, I would probably agree with you there. The category now is recruiting so many people from outside luxury for those disciplines. And it's precisely why I was recruited in, and it's why you came in. So I think that's really good advice. Thank you. So the last one's going to celebrate luxury, even though you were not celebrating luxury.
No, I love luxury. I do. It's just, I wouldn't recommend it to people to go into as a career choice, that's all.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, it's tough. And
or do the way you
have
said.
to love it.
That was a great suggestion. Yeah, start elsewhere, then move into luxury.
And did you know the chief brand officer at LVMH now is ex-FMCG, and she's absolutely brilliant. I don't know if you've ever heard her speaking. She makes so much sense, and obviously super consumer centric. And yeah, I think it's proof. It's absolutely proof. So a question that celebrates working in luxury, and you can make us jealous, it's okay. Do you have any examples, any pinch me moments of something really cool or incredible you've got to experience in luxury automotive?
Yeah, probably in terms of cool, the Orpheus Island, or Pelorus Island, which was a small island off Orpheus in the Great Barrier Reef. We were the first brand to be able to take this luxury accommodation. It's on its own private island. It's an absolutely beautiful resort, but Pelorus Island, the house on there, it's someone's actual house, and it's not normally available. So being able to go there and activate that, and there's like a super yacht there as well. It was just a unbelievable experience, a real money can't buy experience. The guests and the media that we invited, they do a lot of things like this, and they said they've never done anything like it. It was incredible. But probably for me, being a bit of a nerd, what I probably enjoyed the most and got the most pleasure out of is seeing results, seeing sales growth, seeing the brand health, move in the right direction, seeing it outstrip competitors. And our econometric results showing that everything is that we're outperforming competitors, and actually the evidence-based theory is starting to pay off. And seeing the team, like the brilliant team that I've got, really, happy and motivated by what they're doing, actually driving an impact and hitting the bottom line.
And actually, you make a really good point, because you've been in the role for a couple of years now. How long do you think it takes to start to see the results?
You've got to allow a good year or 18 months. And the difficulty is in the tenure of people that in senior marketing jobs is lower than anywhere else. Probably all too often because, they're not commercial. They just talk about marketing metrics. They don't talk about the broader business need. And, they probably don't focus on the data as much as they should. Not always, but, if only 25% of marketers are formally educated, then there's probably a lot of people that I like Byron. I think there's Byron Sharp, or it was through Ehrenberg Bass that talk about it. But it's, if you don't understand evidence-based marketing principles, you're probably spending a lot of money on stuff that doesn't work.
That looks pretty.
It might be beautiful PowerPoint that you can share in Paris, but actually it's not doing anything to hit the bottom line. And actually, to be fair, you see that across the board. And a lot of I won't say which ones, but a lot of companies, brand health, luxury companies, brand health declines year on year, and you wonder why. When they don't do always on, they do big bursts around one big brand event, and that one big brand event doesn't have enough amplification. So it's almost the opposite of evidence based.
It's really a long game, isn't it?
Yeah,
it should be a long game.
Yeah, and it's rewarding actually when you do follow evidence-based, because there's always a battle to try and get it across the line. When you do follow it, that actually you can see significant lifts in brand health, like really significant, like from 16, I think our spontaneous awareness was 16, and it's like jumped to 24, like stubbornly stuck at 16 over 5 years. So yeah, you can move the needle, but you just gotta, actually, follow marketing effectiveness and be more strategic.
Yeah, stay true to your course. I love that. Well, we've come to the end. Thank you so much, Gavin, for your time and your generosity. I know that a lot of our marketers at home are going to see more clearly about how data plays a role in what they're doing. It's been a pleasure having you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.